The cult classic The Crow was rebooted against better judgment. It rubbed many people the wrong way and disrespected many with its mere existence, starting with the alleged original victims James Schmidt and Dorothy Cerny, all the way to the legacy of the late Brandon Lee. Hey everyone, I'm Pat, and today we're going to talk about the movie that, to many people's dismay, exists. The 2024 reboot of The Crow. As you may know, the franchise has had many bad sequels. Still, the reboot though feels like it was deliberately designed to upset fans of both the source material and the first adaptation from 1994. Without further ado, let's dive into it. Before we dive into the dumpster fire that is The Crow reboot, let's take a second to talk about why the original adaptation is such a classic. The 1994 Crow, starring Brandon Lee in his final and tragic role, was more than a revenge flick. It was a haunting gothic tale of love and loss, with a perfect balance of grit and heart. The film's success wasn't just due to the story, it was the emotional weight it carried, amplified by Lee's powerful performance. His tragic death on set only deepened the emotional bond with the audience, giving rise to the Curse of the Crow, as Brandon himself was scheduled to marry his fiancée Eliza Hutton 1 week after wrapping up filming. The original Crow, the graphic novel and the adaptation tapped into a primal feeling, a feeling of wanting justice for the innocent who were wronged during their lifetime and are no longer able to attain it themselves. Eric Draven's quest for revenge wasn't just brutal, it was also meant to be cathartic. His character embodied the idea that love, even in death, can transcend the horrors of life. The tragic love story between Eric and Shelly was the driving force and gave the movie a heart to balance the darkness surrounding it. That's the legacy The Crow 2024 decided to step up to without being aware of it, judging based on the script. Before I roast this movie, I'll admit that the reboot attempted to give us something new, even if it meant destroying the original creators' intentions. The filmmakers were at least aware that the original lacked depth regarding Shelly and Eric's relationship. In the 1994 version, we saw Shelly mostly through Eric's flashbacks. The modern reboot aimed to flesh out her character more and add more substance to their relationship. And what did we get? We got a few more scenes of Eric and Shelly meeting, hanging out and falling in love. A summer romance essentially. In theory, adding more depth wasn't a bad idea, but unfortunately, the execution falls flat. Their superficial and short fling drags on, slowing the pace of the movie down and creating a pacing issue by pushing all the action and vengeance too far back and clustering it all together. Despite more screen time, there's somehow even less to their relationship. Shelly's only personality trait is that she sings, and that's only because FKA Twigs, a real-life singer, portrays her. Two birds with one stone, right? No. This kind of lazy characterization shows a lack of interest, making the audience care about her and the relationship. What's Eric's passion? Maybe acting in a Stephen King movie? In the original adaptation, Eric, being the lead singer of a band, is often referenced to remind the viewer he had a life before his death. On the other hand, we know nothing about the reboot's Eric. In the reboot, Shelly's and Eric's relationship has no depth. They had no past, no hopes, no dreams, no plans for their future together. The original adaptation didn't give us much time with Shelly either, but at least the weight of Eric's tragic loss was well portrayed through the props and flashbacks. In the reboot, the relationship is so underdeveloped that by the time Shelly dies, I'm just like, okay, so remind me again, why should I care about this chunky who hides from her pursuers by going out to party? This is where the reboot completely falls apart. In the original Crow, we had clear antagonists, a gang that had no problem destroying the lives of others for no particular reason at all. They were tangible real-world villains, representing everyday human depravity. You hated them and you understood exactly why you hated them. Nobody felt remorse for Tintin, Funby or T-Bird when Eric Draven took them out one by one. In comparison, I genuinely felt sorry for the opera security guards because they seemed to be just doing their job and having the worst day of their lives. Inadvertently, Eric in the reboot to them was what T-Bird and his crew were to Eric and Shelly. Think about it for a second and then let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with me. Now fast forward to The Crow 2024 and we have a satanic criminal cult or something like that. The movie never bothers to explain their motives, purpose or Shelly's connection to them. The main villain is some kind of satanic ghost whisperer who controls a criminal organization, I believe. Or was he a demon? I'm not sure.
The one who killed you is not supposed to be in your world.
Then there's the tag-along lawyer lady, at least I think she was. And of course Shelly's mom, who is also involved with the cult, one way or another, among a slew of replaceable henchmen. That's about as much as I could gather from the villain's limited screen time. In the original, each villain had a unique personality and vices. From the twisted Tintin to the arsonist T-Bird, you looked forward to seeing how Eric would confront each of them, how they would meet their inevitable demise. But in the reboot, it's just a steady supply of goons the Crow mows down. They have no identity, no motivation, no reason for us to remember them, and even less of a reason to hate them. Watching the Crow dispatch them is more comical than satisfying, especially when Eric starts stumbles through them like he's in a parody movie. The villains aren't even good enough for us to enjoy watching them die. Most of them seem like hired hands caught up in an unfortunate situation. Now let's talk about Bill Skarsgard as the Crow. Don't get me wrong, I think Bill is a great actor. His work in it as Pennywise was terrifying. He perfectly embodied that unsettling energy. But there's the problem. Eric Draven isn't supposed to be creepy, but unhinged due to his traumatic experience. But he's also supposed to be someone you can empathize with. In the original, thanks to his relationship with Albrecht and Sarah, we get a sense of who the real Eric was. In the original adaptation, Brandon Lee brought a blend of charismatic vulnerability and strength to the role. He was physically imposing but not unreasonably jacked like a Marvel superhero. Bill Skarsgard, on the other hand, does not occupy that physical presence, nor was the character written to have any. The rehab center scene showed that well. He's a pushover, and for me, that's an unwelcome change. His lanky frame doesn't help sell the idea of a vengeful revenant back to deliver justice. He looks more like someone who got lost on his way to My Chemical Romance concert and after a wrong turn ended up at the opera house. It's not just Bill's miscasting either, the entire cast feels off. The supporting characters, whether they're meant to be sidekicks, villains or extras, feel like they were pulled from completely different movies at the last second. There's no cohesion or sense of belonging to the same world. Even when a character fits, like the lawyer lady, they're so underutilized that you forget they exist while watching the movie. Let's dive into how the reboot mishandles Shelly's story. In the original, Shelly's murder was brutal, senseless and tragic. She was innocent and tried to fight an unlawful eviction from her home instigated by Top Dollar.
She was fighting tenant eviction in that neighborhood?
Her bravery was rewarded with the terrible fate to make an example out of her and be a message to the other tenants. Although Eric only hunts the perpetrators,
I just want him.
Top Dollar's interference eventually lands him in hot water as well, concluding the story with a satisfying finale. In the reboot, Shelly is no longer an innocent victim, much less brave. She's involved with a satanic criminal organization that chases her before meeting Eric and dragging him into her mess. Her death feels less like a tragic loss and more like the consequences of her poor decisions catching up with her. The circumstances surrounding Shelly's death aren't enough to warrant Eric's resurrection. She's a character the audience, or at least I, struggle to sympathize with. She's just another flawed character, failing at life. Even worse, Shelly's own mother sold her out to the organization, and the supposed Avenger didn't punish her for it, completely undermining the original story's theme of avenging cruel injustice. The villain did the Crow a favor when he disposed of the mom by not having to get his hands dirty himself. The argument that having to live with what she's done is worse could be made, but then killing her would have been the kind thing to do. Either way, this scene makes the Crow look bad. This brings me to the heart of the problem, the themes. The original Crow was a story about innocence, injustice and vengeance. Eric and Shelly were about to get married and their love was cut short by a brutal and senseless act of violence. That's the kind of injustice that resonates with people because it's the worst possible thing that can happen to good people. That's what made Eric's revenge feel righteous, even as he went on a killing spree. But in the reboot, that's all gone.
I found what they killed her for. Shelly, she did something really bad.
The core message is no longer about love and justice. It's about, I don't know, a satanic cult killing random people and a supernatural hero mowing down underpaid henchmen. The reboot tries to paint Shelly and Eric's death as tragic, but when the characters are this unlikable and undetermined to change their impending doom and rather do drugs, have sex and party, it's difficult to feel sorry for them. In the reboot, Eric and Shelly are closer to Funboy and Darla from the original rather than their namesakes. Eric isn't even portrayed as a caring person in this version. He's callous, cold and selfish. In the original, there were moments where Eric lifted people's spirits or scared people straight for a greater benefit, showing his capacity for compassion and his inherent good nature. In the reboot, Eric sits next to his dead friend like it's no big deal, even though he's the one to blame for his death. His homeboy deserved more justice than Shelly did. From this point onward, I was rooting for the other side. And don't even get me started on the opera scene where he scares a crowd of innocent people, including the performers, for no apparent reason. What purpose did that serve? Absolutely none. It was a pointless spectacle that detracted from his character. For those who aren't aware, The Crow 2024 isn't the first attempt to milk this franchise. After the success of the original, we got a string of terrible sequels. The Crow, City of Angels, Salvation and Wicked Prayer. Each one seemed to stray further from what made the original great. The third film, Salvation, was decent at least. It had a novel mystery element to it that kept things interesting. The problem with this reboot is that it borrows ideas from the worst of these sequels without understanding why they didn't work. The satanic elements from Wicked Prayer are here, but they feel just as out of place now as they did back then. It's like the filmmakers didn't learn from past mistakes. Worse still, the movie disrespects the story's origin by treating its source material like it's just another horror action flick. There's no respect for what The Crow originally stood for. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this new iteration also defiles the victims who allegedly inspired the graphic novel. In 1973, in Cook County, Chicago, an engaged couple, James Schmidt and Dorothy Cerny, were forced to stop by a vehicle on the I-57. Inside the car were 4 men. They dragged their victims out of the car and onto the grassy shoulder of the road, where they were executed from a short distance with a shotgun blast to the back of their heads. The perpetrators then robbed them, taking Schmidt's wallet and Dorothy's engagement ring. The police later tracked down the ring to a pawn shop and eventually closed in on the perpetrators. The 3 accomplices were eager to sell out the triggerman, the then 17-year-old Henry Brisbane Jr. Brisbane was sentenced to 1,000 to 3,000 years in prison. After stabbing an inmate to death in 1978, after a long trial, he was sentenced to death on January 22nd in 1982 and scheduled to be executed 1 month later. That day, he told his guards, "You'll never get me. I'll kill again. Then you'll have another long trial, and then I'll do it again." On February 15th, staying true to his word, he stabbed 2 other death row inmates, one of them being the infamous serial killer Clown John Wayne Gacy. I'm also aware that James O'Barr created The Crow as a means to come to terms with losing his fiancée in a drunk driving accident, but I have no desire to pry into that matter, as other media outlets have done that more than enough. If you learned something new, make sure to leave a like. This time around there won't be a rewrite, because it's a reboot of an adaptation. Adhering to the source material is generally the best course of action. Update the look and scenery for a modern audience, but make sure not to alienate the audience with the reimagining. The Crow reboot failed for me in that regard. Identify weaker parts of the previous adaptation and strengthen them. The reboot did that, but the execution was poor. Had the reboot portrayed a committed and progressive relationship between Eric and Shelly, moving in together, Shelly getting pregnant, Eric and Shelly planning a wedding, and then Shelly's past catching up with her, it would have at least created a proper reason for Eric's vengeance. The movie would have still been a disappointment, but it at least had managed to get the audience invested in the relationship. So where does that leave us? The Crow 2024 is a bad movie and deservedly bombed at the box office. It disrespected everything that made the original great, from its themes to its characters, and it adds nothing of value to the franchise. In fact, it tarnishes the legacy of Brandon Lee's iconic performance, as well as, one might say, insult the victims the graphic novel is loosely based on. This movie is nothing but a hollow shell of what The Crow represents. On one hand, I can appreciate that they try to do more than create a soulless carbon copy of the original, much like Disney's trying to do with their live-action remakes these days. On the other hand, it is so different and ignores everything from the literary themes to the character renditions. So what do you guys think? Did The Crow reboot live up to your expectations, or is it as bad as I'm making it out to be? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up and check out some of my other stuff. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll hope to see you again.